Hi, it's Jason from VEMS and EFI Connectors. Today, I've actually had a few questions about how to do a wiring harness. So today I just took a very basic example, and I'm going to do a 6-segment ignition harness, like sub-harness if you want to call it that, for an inline-6 engine. So here's our end result. The cylinder 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, and then stubs through the firewall. Then you get all the signals for the ECU. So keep watching if you want to learn how to do this. So what I'm going to do today is just show you how we plan it out. It's not the only way, but it's I think a good way. So we have some scissors, some cheap crimpers here, cheap ratcheting crimpers with changeable dies. We use these for the, uninsulated butt connectors. And then we have better crimpers for the U-barrel crimp terminals. Just some cheap wire strippers. I think I got these at Lowe's about 5-10 years ago. Then we get some wire, Kapton tape, or you can use electrical tape. It makes no difference. The Kapton's a little bit nicer, but if you don't already have it, I wouldn't really go out and buy it special. So this would be for a 6-cylinder ignition harness. What I've done is I measured from where the front cylinder is to the ECU, and then it'll go through the firewall and all that. So this one ends up being 52 inches to the front cylinder, and then generally on most engines it's about a 4-inch cylinder spacing. So I've done 52, 48, 44, 40, 36, and 32-inch segments, and I just taped them together at the ECU end with some Kapton tape, and then we'll lay this out on the board. Just use a big table or a board, just anything flat and nice and laid out. And then here are the grounds for this. Is going to be for a active ignition system. If you have a passive ignition system, all you need is the power and the signal wire. For an active system, you're going to need power, ground, usually logic ground, back to the ECU, and then also the signal wire, which is usually 0 to 12 volt square wave or 0 to 5 volt square wave. So then this one we have 2 of everything. I usually end up making a branch. This is a little bit messy, a lot of wires, but I branch 3 wires together into a butt connector, and then that going to here, so you get the rear 3 cylinders, the front 3 cylinders coming in, butt connector, and then the black wire in my way of setting it up would go to the cylinder head. Black with the white stripe would go back to the ECU, red would go to the switched power, usually a fuse, and then orange with these stripes would go back to the ECU, and the stripes will indicate what cylinder it is. So I'll lay these out in order. And then this one ends up being 25 inches. That's going to go from the end. 25 inches would be from the butt connector back to the ECU. Or actually in this case the cylinder head. So that would be extra long, but that's okay. I don't mind wasting a little bit of wire in order to preserve my sanity. We'll just strip the ends off the wire. These 3 will go together. This is for cylinders 1, 2, and 3. On an inline 6, if I didn't mention that earlier, but procedure is the same for all the different engines. Just sometimes you'll have a Y in there for a V engine, or sometimes you'll only use 4 for a 4-cylinder. Crimp those together. And then we got the jumper between the 2 sections for the first 3 and the second 3. Crimp that one on. Cut a little segment of heat shrink. Slide that on there and shrink that after. Then we get the rear 3 cylinders. Just strip those. So when you have the rear 3 cylinders stripped, bring in the tie-in from the front 3. And then you're going to get a butt connector to put all 4 of those together. Crimp that. So if you look at this, the longest one will be cylinder 1, cylinder 2, cylinder 3, cylinder 4, 5, and the shortest one will be 6. And then your 25-inch segment will go back to from this last connector to the cylinder head, or the ECU depending on your wiring, which segment you're doing. On passive coils, you won't actually have a ground connected to the coil. You'll have a power and the signal wire. Cut another piece of heat shrink for this rear butt connector. And then we're going to come in with the signal wires. So the orange with white in my setup would be the cylinder 1. I'm just going to tape that together. And then orange with black would be cylinder 2. Orange and red is cylinder 3. And so on. And you duplicate exactly what I did for the black wires for your power wires and your logic ground if you need it. Or if you're using passive coils, like you'd have red instead of black, and then your orange wires or whatever color you choose. And at that point you'd be done because you have your power and your signal. So for these logic ones, you just duplicate the black ones. I usually stagger the butt connectors so that the harness comes out slimmer. So I'd add 2 inches to the red wires and 4 inches to the black with white stripe, or vice versa, just so the butt connectors aren't stacked on top of each other when you put them in a loom. And then once you're done with this section, we get some fiberglass wire loom, or split loom if you like that, or DR25 if you like the shrink loom. There's a lot of options there. I'll show you the fiberglass though. Okay, now I've just quickly off camera crimped up the red and the black with the white stripe segments. Haven't put anything together yet. I've grabbed the heat gun. What I'm going to do is just shrink these, just so you see how it goes. Hopefully the audio is not going to be too bad. It's the fan and the gun. But you just shrink those up to make sure it covers the butt connector so they don't touch, and the wiring loom. Keeps water out of it too. We use dual wall adhesive lined heat shrink tube. Comes in 4-foot segments. You get those from us. They can get them from a number of other vendors as well. Just definitely look for the adhesive lined. It helps at least with this part of the process. Sometimes you don't want the adhesive on there, but oftentimes you do. It shrinks up nice and tight. Move on to the next one. Just try to get it centered on the wires so there's some overlap on each side. It keeps the adhesive will help hold the wires together too, providing some strain relief. Alright. Now I can start putting this together, and we'll start cutting some heat shrink to, or not the heat shrink, the fiberglass loom to go over the ends. And if you want, you can actually put some nails or screws in the, like if you're using a piece of plywood like I am, or OSB, you can put some screws in there if you want. It'll help keep all these together. And put in loose zip ties or use Velcro, things like that. We have some clips that we use that are nice. They have elastic inside, so you just clip the wires in, and then once you get them all done, you tape them up and then just pull them out. But for something like this where you're just doing an example, it's a little bit overkill. If you're doing a lot of them, it helps though. Just grab a piece of tape, put those together. It's starting to take shape now. You can see here when I'm bundling them all together, the butt splices are overlapped or staggered by 2 inches, so you can actually get a smaller loom. So here's your front 3 cylinders pretty much roughed out. If you're doing a 4-cylinder, I usually just do the butt connectors at the back of the 4th cylinder. So then you just have one more set of wires in here and then you'd be pretty much done. Like I said, you can use electrical tape instead of this Kapton tape if that's more convenient for you. Keeping them neat and orderly is probably the hardest part. I'm going to take the tape off this end right here. There. There, that'll help. Now I've got them all in roughly the right place, so I'll just tape up the bundle. And then for these ends, where we have the fiberglass loom. What I do here is grab this. This is 2 gauge, and use these for the end stubs. So this first cylinder, I go all the way back to where the second cylinder would come out. About right there. Slide the wires in. Make sure the wires are all nice and neat. Leave about 1 inch at the end of the wires. And for this one, come back to that same place. Hopefully my hands aren't in the way too bad. This one we're going to want the same length. You're probably wondering what we're doing in this section, and I'll get some fiberglass loom that's a little bit bigger than this 2 gauge, and I'll just put a little section right there, and we'll heat shrink each joint. So here we have some 3/8 loom. Then we bundle these rear ones together, similar to the front. Just want to make them as neat as possible. The more care you take with this, the nicer it'll come out in the end. I don't want to waste your time, so I'm going fairly fast. It does take a long time to make a really nice harness. Okay, my apologies, the battery died in the camera and I didn't notice it. So I'm not sure how far we got when it wasn't recording, but we've been putting the fiberglass wire loom on here. We have 2 gauge here and then 3/8, and then I've got these others cut. So you get a long one, then a shorter one. So cylinder 1, cylinder 2, 3, and then another long one for 4, short one for 5, short one for 6, and then 3/8 for the rest for down here. So we'll just keep putting that on. Just try to get the length fairly close. Leave them long so we trim them up after anyway. There. That's about it. And in this last one, at the ECU end, we really only have the 6 wires, or the number of cylinders you have if you're doing coil on plug. So you have the number of signal wires there, your power for your coils, the power ground, and then the logic ground. And sometimes you're going to want to split this out, maybe up here, the power ground, and then run it right to the head. But in this case, we'll just run it all back, and then we'll let the end user decide whether they want to put a connector on here. So there's 9 wires in this one, so you can do a 10-pin sealed connector, and then just have a little sub harness, which is really nice sometimes. And then we take some heat shrink here and just find the right size. Have a pretty good amount of overlap so that the adhesive from the heat shrink gets into the fiberglass. Just slide it over. This one's fairly tight, so we'll use a bigger size for the next junction. Just be sure to smooth it out. Next one, use the next size up. And sometimes you can fold and tuck over the fiberglass to make it a little bit smaller, slimmer, just to get the heat shrink on. Then I always unfold it so it's better stick after the fact. Again, I could probably use one bigger size heat shrink than this. Just have some patience and perseverance, and it's really not difficult, just time consuming. There we go. Cylinder 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. I gotta get this heat shrink on. So make sure there's no wires showing. All the fiberglass loom is underneath heat shrink. And then we can bring in the heat gun and shrink them. And that's it. We got our 6-cylinder ignition stub harness. Injectors are really similar. You just have we use green for the injector wires, but you have a power, and then the ECU would ground the injector. So you have a red and a green for each one of these. Different stripes for each one, of course, the same way. Other than that, same cylinder spacing for the most part, for most engines. Just grab a tape measure and measure if you need to figure that out. Usually 4 inches is really close. And of course, you know, they'll go some either way. And then we'll grab a little piece of heat shrink for each one of these. Doesn't need to be very long. And I put them on here just to keep the fiberglass from fraying in the future. It looks perfect now, but it'll wear a little bit as you move it around the engine and heat cycle it a few times. It's very heat resistant. I think they go up to 1200 degrees Fahrenheit. But it won't look as nice after it does that. So just put a little piece of heat shrink on there to keep it from fraying, and then you put your connector on. We use either the Delphi connectors for the GM LS style coils, or the Volkswagen 4-pin D-shell connector for the Volkswagen coil unplug connectors. Those are our two most common ones. Of course, any connector will really work. You just need to know the number of wires. Other than that, that's how we do it. Thanks for watching.